Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to Micas. Can I just make a few comments just before we start? We're actually recording this live for Facebook. Yes. So if I'm looking at that camera occasionally, I'm not ignoring the audience. Please, I'm just addressing the other audience online. Please make sure that mobile phones are switched to silent. Thank you. There will also be, at the end of this conversation, an opportunity for everyone to ask questions, and I think we have a roving mic to do that, so everyone will be able to pose a question to our panel of 6 artists here. So welcome to Micas and this morning's conversation, which focuses on the exhibition which opens to the public today, The Space We Inhabit. We're extremely fortunate to have all 6 of the featured artists here with us, and I'm very confident we're going to have a fascinating discussion on the subject of the exhibition, space in its widest interpretation, their individual response to it, and an insight into their practice. Many of you know these artists, but I shall introduce them nonetheless, and they're sitting alphabetically from my left. So we have Caesar Attard, Vince Briffa, Joyce Camilleri, Joyce Camilleri, Anton Grech, and Pierre Portelli. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here. And thank you for, of course, your wonderful contributions to our exhibition. But I just wanted to start by talking a little bit about the exhibition and how it's been constructed before we start our discussion. And developing and curating an exhibition around a subject enables a number of very distinct things to happen. It enables us to bring together the work of artists who work in very different ways, both in terms of their approach, their subject matter, and the medium that they use. It also allows for the selection of the work of artists who work in different ways, both in terms it also allows for the selection of the artist's work from their body of work or practice with the theme and thesis of the exhibition in mind. So it's really taking an aspect of their work rather than giving an overview of their individual practice. So it's really kind of illuminating a slice of their practice. It also enables and encourages a dialogue to be deliberately set up between the works and the artists, which may bring connections and interpretations far beyond any of our expectations, both the artist's original focus and mine as well as the curator. And it's really the visitor that's encouraged to do this. They're invited to approach the exhibition in this way, both to look at the individual works, but also to look at that dialogue between them. And I'm sure that many of these areas will be touched on in our discussions this morning. I mentioned at the opening last night that one of the great joys of working with contemporary artists is the opportunities to discuss their work. And this group of artists are no exception, and I have so much enjoyed the many stimulating conversations I've had with each of them about their practice, their take on art history in general, and their take on everything. It's always fascinating to talk to artists about art history but also what's happening currently, and social politics as well is always so fascinating. And I shamelessly, I'm plugging a catalogue which is going to be published very soon, where we have it's fully illustrated, covering every work in the exhibition. And in addition to an overarching essay by the art historian Joseph Paul Caesar, it includes some really beautiful interviews by each of these artists who are here. And it gives a fascinating light on their approach to their art in general and their contribution to this exhibition in particular. And it will be available in the shop within a month, so look out for that. But those conversations were actually sort of the culmination of the conversations I've been having with them over a period of 2 years. And I wanted to take some of the things they said from that conversation to get us started in this discussion. And there were 2 particular comments I wanted to start with, and I know that everyone will join in here eventually. But Austin, you talked about medium in a really interesting way, and one of your statements was that medium is not that important to you; it's a vehicle, and I thought that was fascinating. And then Caesar, you talked about painting being, and you don't have painting in this exhibition, but you talked about the process of painting being an ability, giving you that ability to seek and not find. And that being a particular language that you were engaged with. And I wonder maybe if we start with Austin and then go to Caesar to talk about that and to talk about the role of the medium.
Okay. Thank you, Edith. Well, I think I'm going to rephrase.
Please, rephrase your own words.
In my own words. Yes, medium in my whole practice is not the focus of my practice itself. But having said that, medium is important in a way that you have to understand the medium that you're working in, right? Rephrasing this. My practice is shaped with the materials I use. So most of the work is not only in its form, but also in its content that the medium sort of informs. Okay? Point in case, for example, if we have to latch this with the exhibition itself, 45 buckets, the flying carpet. That started from my interest in territory as war stones way back 25 years ago, but also in what's happening at the moment right now here in Malta. So basically what I did, it's an ongoing process. What I did was source concrete from construction sites. So each and every segment of that piece is done with material that is not created by myself, by somebody else. And that, in some sort of way, has, it's not inert, it's not neutral, it remembers. And that remembering, for me, is very, very important. Right? And so in this case, the medium is the work itself. Right? And this happened throughout my practice. The medium is essential to, in some kind of way, give identity to the work, rather than using it just as a tool.
And the concrete in this case it's a very loaded medium.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Probably all of our pieces have this kind of, multiple layers of understanding, but this medium is quite loaded, and it carries with it not only historical memory, but also concurrent and contemporary memory, which I think it's important.
And Caesar, I wanted to come to you to ask about your work in this exhibition is mixed media. There's an element of painting in it, very, very, as you say yourself, a very kind of fragmented element of painting that you did very, very quickly. But you were a painter previously,
yes.
And I'm kind of very interested in that relationship between the painting that you did several decades ago and where you are now.
Yeah. In fact, if I were to characterize my approach and go back to the very beginning, when I was consciously doing kind of art, when I was even in my teens. Something that determined what to do or how to do it was whether I found whether I predicted almost the kind of work that I'm doing, or just couldn't make head or tails of what's going to happen. And the latter characterized all my work, because when I passed through various stages, some call it styles, but I don't like that term to be applied in this case. Throughout those changes, one thing was kind of characteristic of all.
You just need to get your mic a little bit closer to your mouth.
Everything is moving, yeah. Yeah,
You do that there. Okay?
okay. Everything was, what was characteristic of these changes was something stable. That is my aversion to knowing where some practice is going to take me. Once I discovered that, I associate it with a formula. And that's when I start thinking of kind of destroying it. Even in regard to the work that I'm doing here, which is actually reinterpretation of an idea, or rather a little drawing on my sketchbooks, which were actually executed, or rather which evolved through this practice. That is, suspending any kind of judgment about what I'm doing, but relying only on the idea that I can move away from it or pursue it. And that is, I would call it the essence of why certain images came about, what brought them about. Mm-hmm. It is this indetermination, this hesitancy, this suspicion that about the image, and a kind of pre-critical approach to what you have not even discovered properly. You know, a hunch that takes you here or there. And then you discover something happens, probably unconsciously, or through the event, through the accidents, etc., that accompanied it. Something happens that you find it really interesting and even meaningful, without analyzing it. I am an analytic person, as you know, and a self-analytic one. But that is kind of a Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing. That is, on one side, I am analytical, post facto. Uh-huh. And on the other side, I am kind of traveling, adventuring, leaping.
Yes,
that's the word.
I think that describes
leaping,
it. But
in the dark or in the void.
But this notion of being pre-critical about the work, I think, is kind of fascinating. As if an artist's life isn't hard enough, you know, to be critical before you've even done it is pushing it very far.
A friend of mine tells me you are a bit hard on yourself, but that's the way.
Yeah, yeah. But that notion of kind of finding your way to the work, and I'm kind of fascinated by that, about discovering what the work is. And I'm particularly thinking of the artists who've got paintings in the exhibition. And Vince, you said something wonderful in your interview for the catalogue about how you put a title to the work or write about it after the fact, and that actually helps you to understand what you've just done. And I wondered if you could comment on that, and maybe for Anton and Joyce also to comment on you know, how you find your way into the painting.
Yes.
And how you discover it yourself afterwards.
Yes. Well, as we've discussed, basically, my work is very much about my engagement with the materials. And like Caesar, in a sense, I put together a series of rules in order to help me engage with the materials. So it's not just haphazard, you know. It's a very structured way. However, within that structure, I actually let the relationship between my body my brain and my materials somehow create something. Now, that can go in various directions. However, it's guided by a series of rules. For example, one of the rules would be that I need to cover the whole space of the painting in one session, be it a painting this big or one of the large pieces there. And so therefore, it becomes a stress on me as an artist. Having said that, within that space, and because, of course, we're talking about space, and my space is that engagement. So when I talk about the space, I'm talking about my engagement with my materials in the space. That space becomes very charged during the process, right? And it doesn't allow me to think otherwise, then about my engagement with the materials. And that is why I go back to the title later on.
I see.
Because the title becomes then part of a game, in a sense, part of a meaning-making process of what I have done, part of my reflection on my process. And things start to emerge because I write during that process, and I observe what I've done, and I research what I've done. And that part of the process, in a sense, helps me understand what I've done. So it's a very complex system.
It's a very complex relationship that you have with the work.
Yes, exactly.
And Joyce, you've spoken about how you create this silence, you call it. You go into this kind of almost meditative zone when you're creating. Yeah. So you create your space to develop what we see here, the pictures that describe that space. Talk to us about that process. It's fascinating.
To tap on what Vince was saying about limitations that we impose on ourselves, I think part of that limitation is also imposed by the material that you choose to use, because the material is going to definitely place restrictions on you. You have to be free, but at the same time, you have impositions by the material itself. But within that limitation, I think you find freedom also, because it gives you a safe space until where you can expand. And then it might then transform and change into something else eventually. But as we were saying during the interview, it's very much immersive, the way you go into it. So I work on multiple works at one go, and the works feed each other. It's like a dialogue, so it's not one work on its own alienated.
Yeah.
And that is how it becomes a process. And there will be paintings that tell you that they are ready, and other ones that will take a little bit more baking in the oven as well.
And one leads to another. It becomes a kind of dialogue as you go along.
There is a visual narrative that then it comes along so very naturally as well. When you are working, at least that is the way I work. So we all have our
you give yourself this kind of mental freedom to go wherever the paintings take you, but the medium is the restriction. That's where you draw some boundaries.
The medium and the materiality of it, yes.
Yeah.
It creates a setting where you can still be free as well. So working with ready-made imagery is not very much what I would go for. I need the challenge of going for something. The unknown is somewhere where I love to be also, within the silence of that. And the lack of noise, the lack of being in that silence also makes sense, because you can go anywhere in that sense.
Yeah, it leaves you very free. Anton, are these all things that Vince and Joyce have said that you recognize in your own practice? I'm sure that you've got a very different way of...
I'm very happy this morning to hear what my colleagues have to say and their approach to this universal medium, primarily speaking about painting. So, and I think I have a quite personal approach to the subject, so to say. I started interesting myself in the medium, in art, in general in the 80s. And I was very privileged to have access to the complete collection of one of our, in my opinion, great painters, post pre-post-war Anton in Glot. And I had access, I was a friend of his wife. He had died young, and I could see his complete oeuvre. And it ranged from incredible drawings, watercolors, landscape paintings, but also his mystical paintings. One particular painting was his St. Francis, which used to be in the bedroom of his wife. And I used to hear her stories of how his artistic career developed. At the same time, I was impressed by this really subtle, nearly haunting color scheme. And at that age, it clicked to me that this is something extraordinary. I remember I had asked her permission if I could copy the design of his palette. It was a large-scale wooden palette balanced on one side. And for the first time, I had my own working space, and I could simulate my own working environment. My nature is introvert. So the first thing I would say, I would not like to speak about my painting. Why? Because it is a very personal experience for me. Now, after doing my School of Art in the 80s, I told myself I want to discover what is painting out there. And when I arrived in Italy, there were many vibrant theoretical approaches to what art is, and particularly painting. And one notion that comes straight to my mind was painting after the death of painting. And I asked myself, what are they trying to say with the death of painting? And I'm not going to go into that story, but I made it myself very clear that although other colleagues of mine were exploring other venues in the art world, I felt I had to remain true to this discipline of painting. It is this factory where I can explore primarily myself, this intimate process of developing an image. Later on, it emerges that my interests plainly move in terms of form, color, and space. So, as you very well said, the selection you did over samples out of my career are obviously more related to the theme we have in this exhibition. But other works also explore this development of formal qualities. So I quote an artist I had very much a good relationship with, because I think us artists, we all have a father and a mother. We're all coming from a history of art. We're all coming from a history of painting. And let's face it, I am also the son of the Maltese perception of painting. So if I just had to mention, the biggest giant of my youth was Caravaggio. So this Caravaggesque understanding, chiaroscuro, light and shade. But what I discovered later on was that this genius is basically the mastery in how he built up his work and the drama that emerges. And the drama, that chilling, quasi frightening effect that painting can generate, is what has haunted me over the decades. And in one of your texts, you speak of the sublime. So the sublime is, to a certain extent, something that I am trying to decode every time I have a fresh canvas in front of me. It happens to be that I have interests that also move into the engineering of materials. So through my brother, I discovered at quite an early age the botanical universe out there. Mm-hmm. And when I developed my research further into the making of painting, so I'm not going to go into that because we'll need several mornings to so I started discovering, oh wow, listen, sangue di drago, dragon's blood. So this is a particular red that is secreted by some of the trees we have in Malta as well. So at that time, I had to go abroad to understand that that tree is also readily available in Malta. So this tree, when it grows, it causes cracks in its skin. To protect itself, it secretes this red resin, and it crystallizes and dissolves in alcohol. A little secret: you have a pigment that, used in a certain way, can give certain results. And over the years, I discovered more of these alchemical materials. It's a bit more alchemy that I like putting myself in. Again, I don't like speaking about it, you know. I often describe art as being like the artist is the magician and one is performing a show.
Well, all art is kind of, yes. I mean, that
So,
describes it. And there is that performative element, which brings me on to Pierre. And you know, we've had this description from the painters about how they have to go into that very personal zone. And you talk about your practice being very much the opposite, that you feel as the creator, you're stepping back. And maybe Austin, you kind of agree with this approach that this is part of your practice too, but you're stepping back and really allowing the audience to almost kind of complete the work.
Yeah.
But I'd love you to talk about that aspect of your work.
It's quasi like the opposite of creating a painting, basically.
Yeah.
But in a sense, there's similarities at the same time, because we're creating work. We're creating work to be exhibited at the end of the day. So even though it's a personal approach, whilst working in your studio, and it's very like solitary in a way, at the end of the day, you still need it's not the approval, but you still need to put the work out there. With regards to my approach, it's more conceptual. I tend to deal with an idea, or tend to visualize an object or something, which is more or less most of the time, as you can see in the works, they are familiar objects. Sometimes, I meet people and they would say, I remember this when I was young. My nana had this. And I use that also in the way that I work. Mm-hmm. My recollections of when I was younger, and for example, the cartridges, and I think they were found in many households, and my grandmother had some, and we used to go in like shout inside them, and it echoes. Mm-hmm. And so yes, there's an element of familiarity to the works, but I also feel that it's important for the viewer and the audience to actually become part, to break this barrier mm-hmm. between what I create and what they perceive. Mm-hmm. And I feel that it's quite a very important part of this relationship, where the viewer actually becomes part of the work. It's very much a prerogative of what I do. So in works which are maybe activated by the audience without them knowing, work which tends to get you closer to the work, I feel that's a very important element within my works. And it's not just that, because I always say that meaning is constantly changing. The idea of me explaining a work to someone, but then someone else comes and, it gives it another meaning.
So it's constant reinterpretation.
The reinterpretation.
Which presumably you welcome.
I welcome it open-heartedly.
Yeah.
So, I think it also gives the audience the participatory part of the process. Mm-hmm. It sort of starts to belong to the audience mm-hmm. as well. The fact that they can change things, that they can make but not necessarily making it obvious. For example, the sound works on exhibition here. you are surprised at some point when you get closer to the work and the volume rises, move away and the volume goes down. So even that element of participation for me it's an important.
Because people are aware of their physicality. I mean,
Yes,
in the
yes.
same way as if they stand in front of one of the big paintings here, or are absorbed by Caesar's piece in the floor, they're kind of aware of
Yes,
how
you
they move
immerse
through
yourself.
it. Or Austin Stones, which is kind of, that plays on the whole idea of space. But the Anima Sola pieces that you've done, you've got two. You've got the piece on the ground floor, and then the piece with the knitting. That's based on something that is a very serious concept. This idea of this space between being suspended in
Yes.
waiting to go to heaven. These
Yeah.
souls waiting to go from one space to another. But you've approached it with a real sense of humor.
I tend to do
is
to do that
pushing
quite a
people's
bit.
pushing people's
Again,
interpretations.
I feel that that the element of fun, the element of playfulness, in the case of the Anima Sola works, is a very important process.
Yeah.
Even saying this, I mean, they all have like multiple layers of meaning, and which are all very valid. For example, the knitting sculpture, it's a representation of, there's time, there's the fact that the figure is within the purgatory ball of flames, which in itself it's not hellfire, because it's the fire of purification. So it's the idea of you're there waiting to be purified to go to heaven. So it's like the midway process, and it is, in reality, it's the liminal space.
Yes.
You're neither there nor here or there, but at the same time, why not have fun with it and do a bit of knitting and so.
I love that, because it speaks of the human capacity to deal with the situation they're in. You think, well, if I'm going to be here sitting in these flames forever, I may as well get on with some knitting. So I love that. Wow, exactly.
I think they had become some kind of an obsession with me. Every time I see one of the statues, either in the countryside, I tend to subvert the whole concept, and instead of having this soulful praying figure cleanse me, do something, and so yes, I think it's a way of it's a way of getting closer to the audience, because at the same time these are figures which are seen by everyone.
Yeah.
But then if you subvert the concept, maybe subverting the religious concept into something a bit more, a bit more playful, I think, yes, that's an important element with both works. I think the starting off concept came about with the statement which says, "Let us pray," and I sort of said, "Let us play, let us pray, let us ply."
Let us ply. I love that.
Let us ply.
I love
So yes, I use it. I have a tendency of putting an element of humor in the work, but I think it also helps to bridge the gap.
Sure.
With the viewer.
But I'm kind of fascinated as well as that kind of examination of the metaphysical space, but also, when we go to the sound work, which we have the
choir.
The choir, the Dida's Lament, kind of coming up from the depths of the earth.
Yeah.
That, to me, that's got a lovely kind of synergy with Austin Stones, and it's also that thing of using those cartridges. You're taking a historical object and using it in a different way. And Austin, talk a little bit about how history plays a part. How you're taking something that's already had a life, or is going to continue to have another life, and how that that becomes meaningful within your work, how you use that and adapt it.
May I go back to Pierre?
Sure.
Pierre puts a lot of emphasis on the relationship of the audience with the work. And this comes from my perspective, from the idea of place. Again. I come from a tiny island, Gozo. So probably this is sort of my connection to the ground and to this idea of site. Site is not only the land. Gozo, Malta have, at least in my opinion, a very strong magnetic pull. But again, its histories, its myths, us in this place. So the place is Pierre's place, all of our places, the works and the audience. The place is the distance between the work and the audience. And in my work, in most of our works, we, of course, Pierre said sometimes it's lonely, especially in a painter studio. I tend to collaborate with many people when I work, but still it's lonely because it's you that are seeing the work and nobody else.
But you also talk about painting being a very jealous medium,
yes,
and how it sucks up everything else, which kind of goes back to what Joyce was saying about you need to be in that zone and everything else is, and Vince, you said it too, everything else is blocked out.
Yeah, of course, as you know, I work in many media and many disciplines. But I can do an installation, a text piece, drawing, an etching maybe, architecture simultaneously. I cannot do painting with them. I cannot. I always say painting is jealous. Because for me, I think, I don't know, if my colleagues share this thing. You need to find your space within painting, and it doesn't come like this. Whatever practice you have, whatever, you can be a genius. I think there is some kind of timing where you can reach a momentum. After you reach the momentum, then when work starts to happen, and where products, if we can call them products, take essence. And this, of course, then eventually comes back to our discussion of place. Once you put whatever work you do in a public space, could be even your studio, no? It's not yours anymore, especially if you think it's done, right? I tend to, especially in painting and even in some other works, I tend to go back and forth to my older practices and sort of reuse them, sometimes reimagine them, repurpose them. But again, what we do usually is we create the work, maybe we give a window of interpretation, but then at the end of the day, I'm not interested in hanging meaning onto the work. I hope that the work is strong enough to give meaning itself. And every single one of us here, and in yesterday's opening, for example, and from here onwards, they will bring their own baggage towards the work. So I might say, I might start with something, and it will be something totally different from.
And that's a very exciting thing, isn't it?
And this is what makes our job fun. You know, as Caesar was saying, we're not looking for formulas, and formulas are broken even by the public. So that's the good thing about it. Going back to materiality and history, you know. In my practice, most of the time I conceal materiality. I hide it. Right? I transpose it. And that, of course, in itself might seem ambiguous, but for me, that blur is important. And probably that blur helps the work live on its own, rather than us. A title, for example, can maybe lead somebody and lead specifically on that corner. I try not to do that.
Sure. And just kind of developing on that notion of how each individual sees it differently, because we all see psychologically. We've got different memories, different perceptions, different experiences. So of course, every work is different to every person, which, as you say, gives it this continual life, which is very exciting. And then we talked about how the person standing in front of each of these works is absorbed by it, that kind of you're physically kind of, even Joyce's smallest works, you're invited into this microcosm. I mean, with Anton, with your large works, and Vince, your large works, it's kind of, it's easy to feel that sense of just absolutely being pulled into someone else's space. But what I loved, kind of just thinking about what you'd all said in the past, is the person. And Joyce, you talked really beautifully about how figuration and the figure was very much part of your practice. And Caesar, the same for you, that you often painted the figure, but it's gone now, but its presence is still there. And Caesar, you said a wonderful thing about, how we're vertical until we're horizontal and we're absorbed back into the earth, and I just thought that was so beautiful and profound. So I just wanted to just kind of develop this a little bit more, to talk about the personal reaction, but also the presence or the absence of the figure within the works and within that sense of space.
Yeah. And this notion, or rather this metaphor about us, I believe it originated in the 90s, especially when I was passing through a very introverted approach to painting, with the same, that is, all the same, explorative, leaping into this dark area of myself, not autobiographical. I wasn't telling stories about myself. I was discovering the environment of ourselves, and this was part of it, because part of the practice in that period in the 90s was in order to help me through this voyage towards some kind of sense rather than meaning, that is, things that make sense to us. I used to turn the canvas around, and sometimes having 2, 3, and at times 4 possible orientations for a final painting. And through that struggle towards this during this voyage, I discovered that there is something which has nothing to do with the biological. It is the verticality that is kind of reflects our aspirations, and this is an old thing. And I remember Joseph Calleja, the sculptor, who was 45 years older than me, and we had our exhibition together back then in the 70s. We used to talk a lot. He from the spiritual side, idealistic, and so forth, and I was rather in my more technologically oriented, purely secular approach, and we somehow accepted each other. We're exploring each other's view, and found no contradiction at all. And this was his work was about gestures, theatrical gestures, onto the clay. And I could see him even now doing those with a kitchen knife, right? And that was his tool. no sophisticated tool or traditional tools. Forget about those. All right? So he was trying, for example, to approach this idea of his vertically, but there were horizontal lines as well. In my case, anyway, that was an image of our polarities. That is, we have those polarities, and we have to abide by them. Heidegger established them as well for us. We have to not come to terms, but live with them. I think I've answered that question. Perhaps this is an interpretation, an approach, a thought of mine. Other people may have their own thoughts. They may see the world differently. For example, verticality. Elon Musk would say, "Oh, verticality, I know where it is. It takes me to Mars." All right? He wouldn't bear me talking about this in this way, of course, because he might be also denying depth, the horizontal. In fact, his rockets landed vertically. And I can never take that, because things never land vertically, or rather, if they land vertically, the Lucifer of Dante, that is head down and with the buttocks up. Not like
not like dive, exactly. And I very much doubt that Elon Musk gives a lot of thought to philosophy or anything like that. More's the pity. We might be in a better place if he did. But talking of that, Vince, please talk a little bit about how you're very interested in philosophy and literature, and how that kind of finds expression in your work. And I mean, in a way, that's kind of introducing the humanity into everything that you do, as well as nature.
Yes. I mean, I do a lot of reading, obviously, which in a way supports my work, although sometimes, I mean, it's kind of transparent. One can't see it. However, I think it starts off my work. There's this kind of first push, with probably something that I have read, not something visual. I never start from the visual, but there's also this kind of responsibility, which I find very important within the work. I mean, if we look at the diptych, the gray diptych, there is, in a sense, a responsibility to conserve everything around us. I mean, the work is created out of dust. It's created out of total dust particles, things that we normally throw away. And there's also this sense of recycling, which comes through as a reflection of, what I'm interested in. And I was talking about creating challenges to myself. That work came about through the challenge that I wanted to create a work which was totally volatile, in a sense, because it is made out of dust. How can I gauge color, and form, if I'm trying to conserve dust and stick dust to a panel? Color changes totally. So it goes against my nature of vision, in a sense. One has to anticipate what's going to happen later in order for the work to become something, And so this kind of responsibility, again, ties into this structure of limitations that I produce, you know, in order for the works to work. It's kind of a small game that I do with myself, you know. And I find fun. I have fun with this.
Yeah.
In the sense that, I try to push the boundaries each and every time with the work. I mean, even with for example, the materials I use. My work can range visually. I mean, I can start something and put, as they say, a spanner in the wheels, and that intervention actually takes me somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's not about chance only, but it's about pushing whatever I'm, you know, comfortable with, in order to make me react.
So it's that notion of getting out of your comfort zone,
Absolutely.
not allowing yourself to, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the comfort zone can start with a hunch. Like the gray work, you know. I think I can solve this. So it's kind of a puzzle, which will, at the end of the day, end up in some kind of object. However, it's a very, very it's a very open journey. You know, it may, sometimes you do a small intervention which totally changes where you're going. You know?
Sure.
So the image, in a sense, is very important to me. However, it's very secondary. The image comes as a result of this structure that I create in order to produce the work.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No,
you know?
it does.
It's sometimes, and it's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun. I mean, you know, I set a challenge to myself to create material, paint that could actually become sculpture, you know? And I make drawing interventions within that thickness of paint in order to, you know, sort of bridge the difference that our cultural differences between drawing, painting, and sculpture. You know, so
It's also breaking down that hierarchy, isn't it?
Exactly.
You know, this, yeah.
And so that becomes a limitation for me, you see?
Yeah.
Or a sort of a rule for
Yeah.
me, you know, trying to break that kind of dimension.
And in a way, the presence of the charcoal in the work and the ash in the work, I mean, it kind of does lots of things because it refers back to your writing, to your reading,
Absolutely.
all of those things. But then it's that kind of regeneration, which is why I think it's got that really interesting dialogue with your work, Austin, the concrete work.
Yeah.
This idea of things kind of, you know, coming out of the earth and then going back into it in a different form. And as Caesar said, you know, becoming horizontal and kind of blending in with the earth again, which is a rather dismal subject for a Saturday morning. But that idea of kind of nature and using objects from nature. And can you talk a little bit about your stones and how you feel the significance of those was when you made them, and how do you feel differently about them now? This idea of, you know, encountering them again, because you hadn't seen them all together for some time, encountering them again, you know, a few years later,
Yes.
and how that you've changed how you see them.
Now, this is a gift that you and Micas gave me. Stones was my first major, large territorial intervention. What I did back then, 25 years ago, was scout the north, south, east, west of the Maltese Islands. I found boulders, three boulders on north, south, and west of the islands. I went in a quarry in Nashar. We exploded 3 large boulders and we placed them in Citygate in Valletta. So I created this kind of, you know, this kind of perimeter. I gilded them in space, and my idea back then was basically diametrically opposite of Duchamp. Duchamp put his urinal in the museum, so that became the work of art. For me, I was placing, I was going to the space, into the territory, gilding the rocks. The rocks become art, so the area in between eventually turns out to be the museum. For me, that was an exercise in transience as well. because at the end of the day, gold was taken back by the elements themselves. And those boulders that are still in the sea in Schweni or in the sea in Delimara or on the road and on the cliff in Dingley are still there, but there's no gold anymore on them. What's interesting about them is this idea of memory. In Gozo, we have there is a stone in Schweni that I gilt, and that's on the beach, and that's the area where divers go to learn how to dive. They still call it today the Golden Rock. So this touch of memory is quite interesting.
That's fascinating.
And fascinating, yes. Anyhow, these stones, the smaller ones, are like relics of that major installation. What I did basically when I was gilding these stones around the islands, I collected smaller stones from the same locations, 13, and I gilt them. In the process of gilding them, I'm sort of obliterating the materiality of the stone. The stone, some of them are very, very heavy, especially the bigger one. But imagine placing them under the sun, direct sunlight. They become light itself. I have images of those or other works of mine that I gilt in open spaces with direct sunlight. And when you see the image, it's as if you have an empty hole. It's like a black hole, basically. So this idea of translating something which is very heavy, it has memory, no? To something which is ethereal, it was quite interesting. These stones, now I'm seeing them back all together. It's quite exciting to see them all together because we brought them from London, from Europe, from Paris.
Everywhere,
it's a gift. Thank you.
No, they look wonderful, and I feel that within this exhibition there's so much, and maybe it's kind of an obvious thing given the theme, but the idea of the natural world has very much been evoked, and we talked about your stones and the charcoal, and but Joyce, talk a little bit about the landscape, because I mean I just see landscape and sky in every one of your works, but I know they're all from imagination. So
Yes, they are basically based on imagination, yes. But imagination is also the fruit of memory. So everything comes from something that you have experienced or lived now, visually, aesthetically. So they are, again, an echo of a particular experience. They come out they emerge very naturally through a process as well. It's like retrieving different memories from the past, and then they come out translated into a new way. People then are going to perceive them again in another way as well. So whatever I would be seeing in my work, many a time other people would be seeing other things, which is quite fine, but you can do with it whatever you want in reality, but you would know where it would be coming from. It would be from definitely the subconscious also.
yeah.
But that is, again, where you're bridging experience, memory, and the present. So there's a lot of past and present within the practice, which is very material in the moment as well. So it bridges everything all together, and creating new perceptions as well for yourself and possibly for others.
Yeah, and I love that use of the word translation, that, you're taking these memories, they're collective, but you're able to...
And they are intangible in reality, because
Yeah.
it's something that you can't really grasp, and suddenly you're giving it material form.
Yeah,
And you can share it with others. It can bring about memories and also shared memories, one thing. It depends on how then they are perceived. But they are very much open for interpretation.
I think one of the things I see in both your and Anton's work, and maybe Anton will comment on this, is the notion of perspective. That you've there's quite deep perspective in both of your practice, which I find fascinating. And Anton, there's also biomorphic forms in your work, and I'm always looking. It's that it's so you're so tempted to try and find out what it is. And even though I know the work so well, each time I stand in front of them, I'm thinking, oh, is it, is it this, is it that? Presumably that's all deliberate.
The process of how I work is pivotal on the studio. The studio itself becomes my intimate thinking chamber. Like I had yesterday during the opening, I had individuals coming up to me. I don't know them, they don't know me, and they want me to help them decode my paintings. Now, obviously, there are many references in the work I do to the history of art, but also to the mechanics of image making. So I went purely into the medium, not to let the medium take over, so to say. My work is basically based on glazing. So there's this sense of depth being created through the brushwork. Earlier, I spoke of painting after the death of painting. So contrary to Caesar, I embrace all these techniques and materials and systems that give me the ability to create an image. Now, the scope of the image then becomes all of a sudden an exploration into the intimate space of the conscious and subconscious. So it is a world where I have audiences who say, your works frighten me. I don't want to go in there. I had that yesterday. One lady said, I started crying when I saw the particular two paintings, and I started seeing this, and I started seeing that. But what is this? What are you trying to do? And that magic is where I don't want to tell the audience what I am trying to do. I think that is the universal language of art. That is this incredible power of painting. So this obsession I have with the death of painting, something so alive and so transformative. We are experiencing this revolution of AI-generated imagery. And when I look at it, I say, what the hell are these people doing here? What happens in the studio? What can happen on a painting, on a surface, with very poor materials? Because at the end of the day, if it's black, it's some kind of carbon bounded with a binder, oil or whatever, or it's gum arabic. All these mixtures, at the end of the day, are nothing but incredible media to set the imagination of the viewer to immerse himself, herself into a world. In this case, in my works, into my imaginative world, and start encountering those angels or demons I am trying to exorcise through my painting process. So there's this process involved. Now, similarly to Joyce, I have drawn extensively throughout my 45-year career. So to say, one is confronted by an object in the real world, and one sees through to drawing how that is transformed into something else. So if we draw the figure, if I draw the figure, drawing the figure doesn't mean recreating the figure. It's just sublimating an encounter. Now, all that personal experience one does through one's life, so we won't go into those details here, fuse down into every new painting that I try to regenerate. So I don't take a solved system from a previous painting, but I tend to want to restart afresh. So this challenge, every time a sheet of paper, a canvas, a surface, or even a lump of clay, I work with what one may assume traditional media. When I returned from Germany in 2000, I had this urge to transform some of those formal structures in my paintings into physical objects. And I embraced concrete differently from how Austin is using concrete in his work here in this show. It is a transition medium which is derived from the industry. So the the color scheme, a cast piece of concrete can create in itself in the painterly language. So in my case, there are chemical reactions that the material exerts on the form that is holding it. There are other materials I insert in order to create these very subtle surface reactions. And all of a sudden, once I work with plaster molds, which I actually lose. So this actual process of destruction of the mother, of the form, which is going to generate a new experience, is for me every time an incredible experience. I don't know till that moment, before I break open the mold, what's going to come out. And there are works, for example, like Stabat Mater, more than 20 years old, which caused a lot of reaction in the public. It was meant to be part of a Via Crucis at University Chapel. And I remember I had quite a rough time trying to explain why this is a religious piece, because it was purely beyond what one would expect a sculptural work. It was basically a mother and child. So and the child was a part of a plough, a Maltese traditional plough, the wooden olive part, which had quasi the form of an arm, but again in a very subtle, abstract, and the bulbous form was the mother. So these two pieces were placed next to each other in such a way and presented in a chapel, and it baffled a lot of people, because I was completely throwing overboard what we were usually accustomed to seeing as a Via Crucis, a sequence of pictures that are depicting Stations of the Cross, but rather a total throwing overboard that language and introducing quasi a very abstract personal approach to understanding something that is more spiritual and sublime. So if we start indulging in this area, my work speaks of, again, I use the term angels and demons, which can be every individual here has his own. We all have our own. So every time I enter my studio, I have relics of experiences around me. Even the pigments and the materials themselves speak their own language.
Of course.
They've
got a presence too.
We know that a painting is an accumulation of hundreds of decisions, yes?
Yes.
Every stroke is a decision. Every action is Lucio Fontana said, okay, I'm going to stop with this. I'm going to take the knife and act. It's also painting. So defining painting today is very complex and very easy at the same time. We are using media. So I had to embrace digital media as well. I work with Photoshop. I take photographs. I have an archive of photography I never showed to an audience. And all these images, this velocity of how one can capture images that pretend to represent the outer world, when in reality they're not. So my paintings are a bit of this transition from what is out there and what is within us. So again, in my case, it becomes an exploration of this intimate space, this intimate territory that all of a sudden, as soon as the works are exposed to an audience, the feedback I get is sometimes even scary.
Well, I think I kind of interested to hear that people were scared of your paintings yesterday, that whole argument about the death of painting. I mean, that's been going on since the 1960s. It was Jacques Derrida, wasn't it, who first said, and it's still going. It's not going to die. I don't know why that comes up all the time. But talking of frightening works, one thing I did hear last night were people were slightly scared about Pierre's heads and actually Austin's heads as well. So I think those heads are absolutely extraordinary. They do feed into that idea of kind of going back to the earth, but it's that subversion, that human subversion that is so fascinating, Pierre.
I'm not sure whether I should call them heads, basically. They're rocks with cavities. But yes, I think the nice thing about calling them heads also is the fact that you can look at the work, and you can actually, without seeing them, you can actually make out eyes and other features like chins and stuff. And only I'm representing this through a cavity of the mouth. Yes, I suppose the actual scariness of maybe scariness in inverted commas is the fact that they are very, very strong and powerful comments, basically. We're talking about possibly not the scariest one. Again, I'm saying scary because I'm fed scared. Scary is the eye, the rock with the eye, with the prosthetic eye, which I felt that it's a very, very strong, powerful statement with regards to. It's an environmental statement with regards to what is happening and the fact that I can only see the eye through the reflection on the plinth. So you discover the eye while possibly just looking at the rock, and then you look a bit down to discover this very realistic, it is a realistic prosthetic eye from the Victorian era. So even the use of the Victorian prosthetic lends itself to the meaning of the work, saying this is not a new thing, this is not a new statement, this has been ongoing for quite a while. But again, it's the way that it's a subtle presentation, not in your face as the mouth with the dentures, which is quite. It's also powerful. A nice thing about that work is the encounter of the work as seen through the eyes of my grandson.
Oh, that must have been fascinating.
And he goes like that. And he's only 1 year old, one year and 8 months old. So even that representation of that strange element. But again, they are all powerful statements with regards to either the environment, avarice, gluttony, the forks with pulling out at the mouth. But again, there are no eyes, and it's just the opening. So I feel quite in comparison to Austin's rocks, for example. Sure. There's materiality to it. There's the idea of the found object.
Yeah.
And in the case of the head, they are found objects purposely, because I tend to look at the rock and I try and see something which is already within that space. So apart from the cavity, I haven't changed anything else. If it presents itself to me as a face or as a head, then I say I can see this, representing. Then I obviously apply the meaning to it, which again, like meaning can change with whatever. And people have a different approach towards the work. But if I had to give them meaning myself, I do call them maybe not protest works, but they are statement works rather than protest. And I think even the use of the materials which have been, for example, the use of the dentures, which I've collected quite a mass from my dentist, and you get some, because also the use of dentures is really very important because of the fact that teeth are an area of interest in what do you call it? You can get a lot of meaning from, not meaning. What is the word? The police, the forensics. So yeah, I've used in previous works I've used these objects and give them new meanings, I suppose. But in this case, they're very, very strong and powerful imagery, and seeing them as because they were not created as a set. They came along in different periods and during different times. So they were not created as a set of three heads. But I can see the idea of me trying to, push at the meaning at the meaning of the actual, the actual object. So I find that it's like a progress when one paints or one reworks or one changes orientation. I don't know how many times I had turned the rocks around, and I try and visualize what I personally can see within the shape.
It's kind of interesting because everyone kind of views them in the way that you viewed them now. That that works. We're kind of buying into what you see in them, which I think is really fascinating. We've talked for nearly an hour and 20 minutes, so I just wanted to, before we open the floor to questions, I just wanted to ask a last question. But before I do, one of the things for me is very powerful about this exhibition is that we're examining space in such just different ways and just pulling it in all directions. And that first floor, the ground floor as you come in, the idea of the kind of, imagined landscape, psychological space that Anton creates, the references to nature, Vince, that you've got there as well. It's that, to me, that's an incredibly powerful room. But then you go downstairs and there's these other dialogues that are happening. So it's the dialogue between Austin's piece with the grid of concrete, with the terrain, alongside Vince's work with the ash and the charcoal. There's a real kind of dialogue there, and Joyce's grid of the smaller works. Those multiple microcosms of how we see the world. And then downstairs, we've got Caesar's map grid. And of course, none of you knew that the others were creating these works. And this is what was so exciting for me, actually, that there was such kind of different stories that were happening here, that there was this narrative that I was able to thread through it. And then that examination of social space, Pierre, which you do so well through the Anima Solar works and the port works downstairs too. And Austin's incredible rocks in the back, which is so. It has been such a pleasure for me working on this exhibition. But I wanted to end by asking you all a question. That if you understand the Malta much better than me, but if someone visited this exhibition with no knowledge of art in Malta, its history or its current state, what do you think this exhibition would tell them? What would you hope people would go away with a sense of?
Well, I suppose I would imagine that we can do away with the word Malta, because at the end of the day,
I completely agree.
At the end of the day, we are artists, we are creatives, which we are. The only reason would be the placement of the space. But it's like exhibiting in other places. So from an artist's point of view, I would feel that one, the audience or the visiting audience who are not Maltese can relate to what has happened within the contemporary idiom on the island. Because at the end of the day, we are Maltese, but we've all exhibited also abroad extensively. So I would imagine that the interest would lie within the subjects, because some of them are very much based on our historicity, like the anima sola. So I think that is what they would take with them, is the contemporary art scene in Malta is not something which is dormant. I mean, we've all been working for more than like 30, 40 years. And we've all been doing things sometimes together, with our yes, he's the younger one. No, and Joyce.
Yeah, and it's that international connection, and of course that's why we deliberately didn't put Malta in the title.
Yes,
because it was
I totally
irrelevant.
agree.
It was,
Yeah.
this is a contemporary art
Yeah.
exhibition around a theme. Does anyone else want to comment on Vince?
I think in a sense, I mean, we've talked about sensibilities today, and I think this is core to what's shown in the show. We are all Maltese, no? However, it's our sensibility which brings us together, rather. We're very complex people, we're interested in things which are fickle, and we've talked about found objects. I think if I were to be metaphorical, I would say that we are found objects on an island, of an island, in a sense, because the found objects have so much meaning,
I love that.
And they create meaning.
and they create meaning.
Caesar.
Yeah. Your original question was about the innocent to art, or the people innocent to art who approach the works for the first time and wonder this innocence is hardly existent nowadays because the exposure has been throughout the whole globe. So, what is our position vis-a-vis this group of people? My suggestion would be that it is perplexity. Yesterday I had a discussion with a British friend of mine, and we were talking about, he was talking about confidence, and I mentioned perplexity. That is, they approach a work and they are perplexed what to make of it. They are perplexed because even if they have some sense of it, they lack the confidence to believe in their resolution of the work. That is, the work requires a resolution. We, the creators, kind of, which I don't like that word. Why? Because it is actually a bit of a myth. So we tend to believe that there may be a stable meaning or sense of the work, whereas that is not true, not even for ourselves. We are adjusting ourselves to its meaning. Before this exhibition, I had another one at the Valletta Contemporary.
I saw it, it was wonderful.
Where I revisited my own work. And actually, the condition I placed for accepting the invitation was that I do not show the past works, or rather, if I show the past works, I have to show also an answer to them, a challenge to them. So the idea was to challenge. So that shows that I wasn't really, the sense I had of them wasn't stable at all. It didn't last not even in my lifetime or in part of my lifetime, not to mention eternity or, and all this stuff. And another thing which says something about the relationship between any viewer and the work and us was the insistence, because this betrays a lack of confidence again. The insistence to have a stable meaning out of the artist. I was invaded yesterday. I couldn't go up and have a drink. So, and everyone was trying to ask. And I told them, well, what do you see? All right. So the first thing you need to do is to look at what you are seeing and try to articulate it yourself. Say Anton's work or Joyce's work, even if they are colors, medium, what kind of medium, what is tempera, all right? That is the starting point of it. Then comes the story you build to comfort yourself. Why? Because your perplexity needs comforting, after all. So these are the two things which actually reflect on the maker, the one who passes through a history of adventures or research or choices in order to be satisfied with what is there and stop, because it never ends. You can continue to stop. Good. That is one thing. And the other one is that the viewer, instead of asking for an explanation, or even instead of supplying an interpretation, asks questions. And if the question is answered, it is hardly interesting. If it is unanswered or difficult to answer, that is closer to what may be happening to you and to us.
That's good. I think that's a very good point to stop and to open the floor up to any questions that anyone has for the 6 artists. We have one over there.
Thank you very much. First of all, a very big thank you for this enriching discussion, very far-reaching, and thanks, Micas, for organizing it. 2 questions. In part, they were touched upon by various members of the panel. The first concerns image making. My curiosity is, how do they approach image making? Is it a point of departure or a point of arrival or something in between? And the second question concerns space. We've spoken about personal space, areas of comfort. I wish to address this space within this building. When they were approached to exhibit their works, how did they react to this unusual space that was being provided to them? The size, the dimension, the magnitude. Thank you.
So does someone want to take the first question?
Can I take parts of it?
Huh?
One is about space. The first one was about?
Was about image making.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Do you want to do image making, Anton?
What I want to start with and answering your question is that this space creates a very special environment. There is a contribution to our work which speaks of seriousness. So this, I think, is a first in Malta. So to say, our audience can perceive our work in another situation, differently from a private gallery. So it's one thing seeing works in a home. It's another thing seeing an artist's work in a facility, let us call it a facility like Micas. So for myself, for my colleagues, I think this new experience is something to embrace, because the environment contributes to how an audience perceives a work of art. So this contribution to how the local or international audience will now perceive our works in this space brings a new level of perception to the Maltese Islands. So the younger generations of upcoming artists will be, if I can say it, more privileged than us, because they're going to experience, they're going to grow up with a dedicated, serious space to contemporary art practice. Now, pardon? A reference point. So I think in this context, for emerging Maltese artists or whoever decides to come and live in Malta and practice art, there is an extraordinary new platform. So I think it was very courageous for us as a people, if I can speak in this way, to make this step. So it's important for me to keep stressing this point, because I think it is a game changer. So going to the question of image making is the mechanics of artistic practice. So if it's Austin manipulating found objects materials, if it's Caesar with his
The tiles.
tiles, if it's Pierre with his, can I call them sculptures?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's one grows up in a very, very restricted use of language: painting, sculpture, installation. So I think at the end of the day, each one of us throws everything overboard. One has a creative energy source, name it how we want, in producing a message, signal, source of, I spoke of angels and demons before, you know? So an audience will perceive these inner experiences, we all do. And I think the media at our disposal, at the end of the day, are the tools for us to get there. Some reveal more, some reveal less. So then again, that's the whole beauty of it. There's so much complexity and diversity in a united show. So I think that is how I would.
If I may, I think I think I also need to mention, with regards to the privilege that younger artists will have, the international platform that the space offers, because previously we used to need to go abroad to visit exhibitions. Now we're getting the big names. People are like, or artists are getting interested in the space, as we've seen with Anthony Gormley. So you know, I think that international opening has really put us on the map with regards to the art scene. Let's say the art scene in Malta, the contemporary art scene in Malta. So I think they're very privileged as well.
Just
Of course, yeah.
two sentences to answer John Paul's question about the space. Again, Micas, this space, no, has its own weight and its own volume, all right? It's not about filling the space, it's about activating it, all right? For us, it's not just a backdrop, you know, it's a collaborator rather than anything else. So at least in a couple of works of mine, you know, the stones themselves, you know, the way you dispose them, the way they interact with the hewn stone of the bastions themselves, or even the 45 buckets, all right? I had to rethink that work. In fact, the scary heads were the precursor of 45 buckets, and that's why they are here. They're still made of the concrete, but what I did in this case, I tried to colonize the space very, very quietly.
Thank you.
Just to add to what has been said here, I think I think this space has, for the first time, afforded us to negotiate scale. I think this is a very, very important thing to be said now, because within the educational system, we still don't understand that artists need space, and huge space to work in order to be able to present something in a grand scale. And it's, I think that this space is really giving us this very important element that, of course, when we go abroad, we're always looking at large pieces, no? Large pieces with large spaces. And this element, I think, is present here and presents a challenge to us as artists to negotiate this kind of space and to make sense out of it and to up our game to that dimension. I think that this is a very, very important step towards the way that we look at our own production.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Shall I go? Thank you. My question is actually for you, Edith, about the curatorial, and actually it's been touched upon by Austin and Vince just this moment. But I noticed a couple of things in the exhibition which I was curious about in curatorial terms and wanted to ask you about. One of them being the dialogue with the space. Micas isn't a neutral environment, and this exhibition is in dialogue with a space which is very loaded. And I wondered how you thought about that as a curator, and how you kind of how you approach the exhibition design. Another element I noticed was that some of the work is selected from a pre-existing body, while other work is new. And what the conversation there was, and kind of the curatorial considerations that led you to make certain choices and not others. And the third thing I noticed was that there's a very strong sort of aesthetic coherence between the works. Aesthetically, visually, it's a sort of very coherent show. And somehow, intentionally or unintentionally, that also is echoed in the architecture. Architecturally, it's also sort of in dialogue. And I just wondered what the sort of curatorial thinking and consideration behind the design and the concept and the selection was. Yeah, that's my question.
Okay, thank you. Goodness, that's quite a lot of questions there. So the space is loaded, you're right, but I don't think in that way of the past history. I kind of value the fact that it's this unique space, and that you've got these, historic elements to it with the modernity, modern intervention. And I think what it does is it creates this space which is entirely unique, which is embedded in Maltese history. And that's a wonderful thing. When I first encountered I've been involved with micas, I've been lucky enough to be involved for a number of years before I started working full time. But when I realized what the galleries were going to look like long before they were completed, I had that moment thinking, goodness, this is really tricky, because I'm so used to working with informal galleries. But I've worked in quite difficult spaces, like, having said formal galleries, I have worked in difficult spaces like the Guggenheim in Bilbao, where not only do the walls curve round, but they actually tilt back as well, and you'd have to try and hang paintings on them. So I've encountered that. But what I did was just the time spent in here meant that I started to really value what it gave, and that it gave this otherness, and it gave this openness. And I see that it has pushed me as a curator to be more brave, to see things slightly differently. It's also been incredibly instructive for me to bring artists, these 6 included, around the site. And, it was mentioned Anthony Gormley came over, and we had Joanna Vasconcelos and a number of other international artists. Universally, everyone has said, oh my goodness, this space is, it's totally creative, it's very inspiring. You could see that it was going to push people to do amazing work and to fill the volume. It was something that Joanna really understood at the beginning. And I remember actually on the opening night of Joanna's work with Austin, and he said, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to make this work? And I knew it would be okay. But I didn't want the artists to get too anxious about what they were putting in. I thought, that's my problem. I take on that problem as a curator. I have to fill this space, as well as kind of, communing with the volume and the walls and everything else. I had to make sure that dialogue was a firm part of the curation. Sorry, excuse me. And when it comes to the selection of the work, I selected the artists for the work they had already done. And I had very different conversations with all of them about the work that they'd already done that we would put in the exhibition, and the work that they wanted to create to put in the exhibition as well. I didn't want them to feel restricted in any way about what they were able to do. And I didn't want them to feel restricted or any responsibility about establishing a dialogue between the work of their work and others. They didn't actually know unless they were talking to each other, which I think you weren't. You all told me you weren't, and it didn't matter, but I knew you weren't. But that was my problem, not theirs. And I thought it was important that their focus had to be solely on the work, and all of those other considerations were things that we took on as a museum in the way that we should. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Thank you. There was another question here.
Hi, I'm very grateful to be here and hearing all the artists present, and all your creative work has really inspired me, especially giving a great salutation to the Maltese artists representing contemporary art. And I would like to speak about space, which you have just spoken about, and this is a great opportunity to have this external space. And as you all know, every artist is in search of this space, because we are feeling on the island claustrophobic, whether it is traffic, whether it is construction, whether it is, restriction in our views and our opinion. And I feel that you have all interpreted some history, some recognition of you being alone with your media and interpreting an inner space. And I found a lot of value in the talk of Vince and also Joyce when you spoke of your intimate expression towards art. And Joyce in particular, when she spoke about the sound and the silence. And I would like to interpret that as that is an inner space where all that you have done has come from that. And if you can, or anybody can elaborate more on my way of thinking and show me if I am right about it, or if it is your operations, if it has come from that point of reference where you have found your inner space and you have extended this into this vast, huge external space.
Yes, definitely one finds his or her inner space. Then the problem is actually getting it out. And it takes process and it takes time as well. I think that the struggle with each and every one of us here is actually feeling human into what we are doing. And if my art, if my process, if my practice is the way for me to feel human in what I am doing, we're all different. But we are interacting with the media that we exploit, the materials that we look for and that look out for us. So if you decide that something attracts your attention, it means there is something into it, and then you have to follow it. Whatever we do is done with intention in the end. And there is an initial intention, then there is the practice in the moment, and then there is the output at the end. If that gives you value and it gives value to what you're doing, I think we are practically on the right track.
Thank you. Any more questions? One more here.
First of all, thank you for all you're doing and you've been doing for us. My question is regarding AI, artificial intelligence, because I'm always questioning the role of artificial intelligence with creative intelligence. And I would like to ask, any of you used AI throughout the creative process at any point? And if yes, at which point did you feel the need to use AI in your creative process? Thank you.
I think the answer is coming down from the sound
We're hearing
emitting
it.
from the galleries downstairs. So basically, I used AI as a part of an important materiality in reality, because the choral voices that are being emitted from the shells is an AI rendering of Dido and Aeneas, the opera by Purcell, which is the lament, basically Dido's lament. But again, if I had to explain like quickly the meaning of the work, obviously it's based on war, and for those who don't know the story of Dido and Aeneas, it's a case of love and hate, because at some point Dido or Aeneas leaves Dido to go back to Rome, and that is the basis of the creation of war between Carthage and Rome. And I felt that if I had to use real voices, it would put it into a past context. In reality, what we're living today with technology, with using AI voices, would really place the subject of the work in a more contemporary, more now approach. So that is the only piece with an AI element to it. So I used AI as a sort of material, basically. So
There was another question here.
I don't know whether any of us here were in the turn of the century conference on Malta and the arts, and during that conference there was this urge for a space for the arts. So maybe after 25 years, this wish of the then artists and thinkers has come true. But please permit me one banal question now. We've heard a lot, very interesting material about how things are done, what motivates artists to produce certain works of art. But may I ask this banal question? Why do you do it?
Why do you do it?
We're doomed.
We're doomed.
There is no way out.
A curse.
Can I just make a small observation? Ray Pitre, whose work is here, once told me, and I'm going to say it in Maltese, l'arti hija forma ta' ġenn. And I think that actually sums up everything, because you need to be mad, crazy, to dedicate a whole lifetime to this. So I think, yeah, and I agree totally with that. Art is a form of madness, and at the end of the day, what is madness? It's an obsession on something, no? putting it very sort of basically. So
I would add something else to this madness. It is actually like some other activities of human beings, a kind of trap. That is, from our childhood, we were selected by our peers as being capable of something. You know, I remember even in the primary school, taking a corner of a building out in limestone and carving a head in it, and the other peers would crowd around you and admire it or admire you, and this was reinforced. It was reinforced as we went along in a gradually more sophisticated way. So in a way, this madness is not peculiar to the artist. It's peculiar to society, to how we are, how we react to society, and how society reacts to whatever we do. So one must not mythicize the idea behind what makes us do things. Right? What makes us do things is what is actually possible doing in this case. And for example, in the case of micas, the possibility of, for example, my thinking of converting this image, which was hanging upright in 2012, or rather floating upright, as a set of tiles, was because of the environment, of the architecture of it, of the different levels, and I immediately pinpointed a place. I intruded a bit into the curator's field, or rather, it was a proposition I had.
I was very happy to accept it.
But then she acknowledged the fact that the only place visible for me was the down under. In the past, when we were, that is, Tony and you are familiar with this, when we had these collective exhibitions, everyone was clamoring to have his work or her work, mostly his work, in a prominent position where the introduction, etc., used to be held, you know, and no more of that anymore. Thank God.
So, thank you for that question. I think we have to make that our last. So we end in that note of being doomed, tortured, competitive. But I think what you have all brought to us in this exhibition is great beauty, great thoughtfulness, wonderful art. And thank you for that, for giving us here such a wonderful exhibition, which we know will bring a lot of pleasure and not torture to our audiences. They will derive as much enjoyment from it as we all have. And thank you so much for this morning's discussion. Thank you to everyone here, and to the Micas board and Phyllis, our chair and CEO, for all of their support. Thank you.